David Katz, everybody. Always
Mark,
technical drama.
To be with you, and I'm sorry about this situation today. I went out and got myself earbuds. I practiced yesterday, so I'm going to have my friend come over and practice with me again. And by next Tuesday, I think we're going to hit the ground running on video and everything. So
I love it. I love it.
I was used to doing Pat's show. You know, Pat's show was on the radio. So
sure.
But I like this. I like talking to you on the podcast. And like I said, I'm moving in the right direction to get it all together for your listeners and your viewers.
Well, no apology necessary. And I'll tell you what we'll do. Kim will blow out the news at 11:30, and instead we'll just participate with David, and we can have the conversation that way. And that way we don't lose any time. Are you cool with that?
Yeah. Well, you know, I had the breaking story, so if I have anything else to talk about, I'll let you guys know.
Again. Yeah, very, very cool. But please feel free to participate. And as I was saying before, everybody in the text line, you can jump right into the live text on YouTube.
Why don't you just text it?
Participate in this conversation with David. So I was mentioning
Mark,
that there.
Mark,
go ahead, David.
Mark, with Pat, we used to do the lightning round where we would do like 6 legal news stories, you know, during 1 hour of her program with the commercials and everything. So we had about 30 minutes, and we did the lightning round. We did 6 legal cases of interest. So if any of your viewers, listeners want to call in with a question, you know, we can do the lightning round.
I'd love it. I'd love it. Text it right in, and we'll try to get to it. We'll put it to the side, and we'll try to get to it. Tell me about these revelations that are exposed from the Trump presidency, essentially turning the IRS and DOJ loose on political rivals.
Well, this is exactly what Nixon did. It's one of the things that got Nixon impeached, you know, along with the Watergate break-in. It's one of the reasons why he's remembered, as an infamous, foul, evil person, because you don't do that. You don't sick the IRS on your enemies. Not only is that, of course, totally against the rule of law, but two can play that game. And I think no one's really played that game. You know, I do a lot of these criminal tax cases, and my clients and I always wonder, like, where did the case come from? We haven't seen one that was political in this way, but this one clearly appears to be political. Now, this is an interesting story. If you can give me 2 minutes on it, there's a fellow named Reddick, and Reddick was picked by Trump to be the head of the IRS, which sounds like a very technocrat job. Now, this Reddick had an interesting background. It turned out that he had actually owned 2 condos in the Trump Hotel in Waikiki. He said on his financial disclosure form when Trump picked him that he had 2 condos in Waikiki. He didn't say in the Trump International or in a Trump-branded hotel. That had to come out. They confirmed him for the job anyway, and you have a 4-year term, more or less. So this is when his term is up in about November. And it's also an interesting job, Mark, because at some point, not just the DOJ, but the IRS weighs in on whether Biden, his son, should be indicted for tax crimes. The DOJ can prioritize it or not. They can investigate it a lot or not. But the IRS has a hand in there, too. So this Reddick is in a complicated situation. Most people think that he's going to be let go. His term is, why shouldn't Biden pick somebody that he and the Democrats are comfortable running the IRS? The other interesting thing about the IRS is that you can turn people in. A lot of people don't realize that, but there's an organized snitch system of whistleblowing, and people do it all the time. They blow the whistle on Biden. They blow it on Biden's son. They blow it on all kinds of people. Something like 5% of those cases go anywhere. The other 95 are just vindictive, mean-spirited, baseless. But it's a real thing that people try to get the IRS and get that office that's run by this IRS chief to go investigate Biden or to go investigate his son or to investigate some big Democrat during Democratic administration. What's peculiar about this all blew up because Comey and McCabe, 2 high FBI officials, we remember Comey being fired, everything that Comey did, targeting, Hillary Clinton, maybe costing her the election in 2016. But Comey, as people remember, came to be a huge enemy and was on the Trump enemies list. And so Trump was going around. Well, the first part of the story is that there's a very special kind of audit. It sounds very technical, but it's important. There's 150 million taxpayers in America, more or less. And only about 5,000 are chosen for this very, very special audit, Mark. And in fact, WAGs say that it's an autopsy without the benefit of dying. It's that much they get into all of your financial business. They overturn every single financial stone. It's so rare. I've never had one of these cases. 5,000 in the whole country in a year. Well, guess what? Comey got, quote, randomly selected for one, and McCabe, Trump's other enemy, got randomly selected for another one. So this guy Reddick, who's the head of the IRS, sent this all to an inspector general. This is like with the DHS and the Secret Service has the inspector general. Well, there's a career inspector general over at the Treasury Department who's supposed to be looking into this. Query why this guy started back in July and he hasn't solved it yet, Mark. It's either random or it's not random. Go back and duplicate how they randomly, supposedly, picked Comey and picked McCabe, Trump's huge enemies. Let's figure out what happened. Anyway, that's been dragging along when Trump, to try to get back at DeSantis and to say something bad about DeSantis, said, that guy owes me everything. When in 2018, when he was running against a fellow named Gillum, they were running against each other for governor. And back then it was very close. So Trump says, I sent in the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office. That's my old office. Trump says, I sent in the FBI and the U.S. Attorney, and I stopped the Democrats from stealing the election. That got Kelly, who'd been the former chief of staff, who's a Marine guy, a totally straight arrow, not political at all, to say, wait a second, I'm not going to sit by. I was the chief of staff. No, Trump didn't send in the FBI. He didn't send in the U.S. Attorney's Office with DeSantis. He's making that all up. So that's where we are right now, and it's a pretty fascinating story.
It is, and the trail is knowable, right, David Katz? Like what you're talking about, you should go back and figure out how this actually happened. That trail can be followed back to actually figure it out, whether indeed it was random. I mean, it seems strange credulity to think that it would be that it's random. The story just reeks of BS.
It's strange, much more than credulity. The New York Times actually had a mathematician to figure this out. And you figure, okay, so they probably do this with rich people. So it's not 150 rich taxpayers. So what's it, maybe 15 million rich taxpayers? Even so, to be selected as 5,000 out of 15 million, it's still unbelievable. And to happen twice in 2 different years when Trump was in office. So everyone thinks that there's some way that you can suggest somebody, put their name on there, twist somebody's arm, the guy wants a promotion. Now, the IRS has sent it to the Inspector General, Mark, but they said it's ridiculous. Who could believe this? They're career civil servants. And, on the face of it, I just think that the head of the IRS should resign because, or at least have his term come to the end and Biden should pick somebody else. I don't know him. I have nothing against him. But when something like that happens on your watch, think about it. 2 incredibly prominent political opponents of Trump are chosen while you are Trump's hand-picked head of the IRS. You don't know anything about it. You don't know how it could have happened. But you know what? The buck stops here. It happened on his watch.
And it's not just 2 political opponents either. It's super high profile. I mean, these are, they were becoming household names, right? Everybody knew James Comey, right? I think, David, this goes back to watching the watchers. You know what I mean? There's just, if no one is enforcing the law, and so much of, and we saw this in spades in the Trump administration, if no one is looking at the emoluments clause, if no one's looking at pay to play, if no one's looking at weaponizing the Justice Department or the IRS, as you suggest, if they see it, but they don't call foul on it, then it doesn't matter what the law is, does it?
Well, it's really a scary thing. And, I'm a working lawyer. I'm a criminal defense attorney. A lot of my cases are criminal cases brought by the IRS. A case goes beyond an audit. Both these cases went to this incredibly intensive audit stage. They didn't go criminal. It's a whole other part of the IRS that takes these revenue officer, revenue agent cases from the audit stage to the criminal stage. And that's a very important point in a case. There's all kinds of safeguards supposedly about that. Although there are some strange things that happen where people get selected for criminal prosecution too, Mark, and you really shake your head at some of those. I absolutely agree that with Trump, it's very, very suspicious how these things happen. On top of that, he ranted all the time. That's what Marine General Kelly, who was chief of staff, said. He ranted all the time. Let's go prosecute this guy. Why doesn't the IRS look at that guy? And he was ranting and raving. And, the idea, this is what Michael Cohen said about Trump acting like a mafia boss, right? He doesn't say, go whack this guy. It's like, wouldn't it be nice if this guy, weren't around? Wouldn't it be nice if somebody did something about this guy? Wouldn't it be nice if this guy were, investigated by the IRS? And you get the idea of where he's going with that, Mark, right? And then some ambitious person in the White House. Politics is full of incredibly ambitious people who will step on the line to get ahead. And so, Trump didn't have to actually call somebody at Treasury or the IRS. But this is much more than a coincidence. This was a political hit. And like I said, I don't know why it's taking that long to do it. I'm old enough to remember when they used to pick judges at random in court, and they actually picked a name, right? They say, you have Judge Jones. And they kind of show you the thing. The magistrate judge would pick it and say, you have Judge Jones on your case. And it was random. And one time I questioned it, and the court treated it like it was a huge insult that anybody would even question it. And I said, well, I just want to see the name that was drawn. And I almost got held in contempt, and I never did see the name that was drawn. So these, the courts, the agencies are very defensive, and they say, trust me. But, trust but verify. So let's trust but verify. Let's see exactly how this was picked. And I think what it's going to show is that somebody put their finger on the scale and somebody got Comey and got McCabe. And they both asked, Mark, to have an investigation at a very high level to figure out what happened. There may be other people who got targeted. If one of those people called me and said, I think I got politically targeted, if I could get rid of the case, I'd probably try to get rid of the case, right? A lot of people don't want to come forward and say I got politically targeted because, half the people are going to think, well, he must have done something wrong. Where there's smoke, there's fire, right? So some of the people presumably settled their cases. They presumably targeted a lot of other people politically, but they paid the IRS $50,000 and had it go away, which is
as you say, they make there are a lot of positions short of pleading fully guilty that just gets the government off your back. And as you also note, they can turn your whole life upside down. I mean, so at the wishes of this mafioso president, which is really what Trump was. I mean, you talk about turning these huge government agencies, the Justice Department, the IRS, on his political rivals. It's disgusting when I think
Joe
about
Box and Little Anthony.
No, exactly. It's like ordering a hit from Joe Box and Little Anthony. Hey, I want to turn you to this Moore versus Harper case, which the Supreme Court is hearing. And it sounds like, one of those type cases that, Moore versus Harper, your eyes glaze over. But the reality is this has to do with the districting and redistricting and powers of the state. I wonder if you could kind of boil it down and tell us why it's important.
It's going to come up in two ways that are very important, okay? You're going to have gerrymandering done at the state level, where they end up with a state that votes like 52% Democratic in the presidential or the senatorial election statewide, and yet it has usually it's Republican, it has 7 Republicans out of 10 in a state that's 52% Democratic. It's got 70% if it has a Republican legislature, because the legislature gerrymanders. Now, the first challenge to gerrymandering is to go to the state Supreme Court. This case would say that the state Supreme Court has no power to even review the state legislature. One of the things that's remarkable is why the federal Supreme Court wants to get involved with that. If the state has a right to review the state legislature, if the state courts do, then they do. And if they don't, they don't. And that seems to be like it's really a creature of state law. Now, they're going to try to assert some kind of federal constitutional right or separation of the federal powers from the state powers, or there's some federal right. So that's going to be where the rubber hits the road. There's going to be no review of obvious gerrymandering. And the other one are the election restrictions. So you remember back in the pandemic, 2020, some of the states said, oh, my God, the pandemic's so bad, we have to allow all of this, remote voting. Meanwhile, the state legislature, let's say in Pennsylvania, hadn't made provision for remote voting. So the Supreme Court said, no, it's fine. We can have remote voting. Presumably, if a legislature said no remote voting, if they said no drop boxes, if they had incredibly inconvenient hours for voting, which looked like it was an attempt really to racially discriminate, there's nothing that the state could do about it. The state courts couldn't even review that. And that was the argument that went up to the Supreme Court. That was the one they were scared that Alito and Thomas were going to get some other votes for. Alito and Thomas didn't get any votes for it. It went nowhere, the challenge to Pennsylvania's system. But that was the challenge. And that's where the rubber hits the road, both in the gerrymandering, which wouldn't be overturned if you had a willful legislature. They could do just about what they wanted. And the state courts couldn't review their own state legislature. And likewise, the state legislatures and state boards, the state courts and the state boards couldn't change these legislatures that curtailed voting rights, let's say in Georgia or Arizona or someplace like that, if this Harper case becomes law. And you wonder why the Supreme Court took it, because it seems far out, and it seems like they're going to do something far out, and at least 4 of the 9 are willing to take it. So you wonder if they have a 5th vote to do what I think would be a very foolish and not legally required ruling. It seems like another political one if they do this.
Well, it's clearly political, it would seem, as you say, but it will also have this awful ripple effect of essentially calcifying, politically calcifying power in North Carolina, for example. Wisconsin comes to mind. There are other states where, there could be a power grab that would be forever, in political terms.
Well, this happened in Wisconsin, Mark. And luckily, Evers, the Democratic governor, won re-election, so he can temper what the very right-wing, very gerrymandered legislature is doing.
Although even, David, even in Wisconsin, sorry to interrupt, but even in Wisconsin, they've knocked the slats out from under the power of the governor in many ways. You're right, he can tamp it down a bit, but his real power is just not there. I mean, what he formerly had.
Right. If the courts can't review the state, this is the state courts. This is not somebody running to the federal courts. This is somebody running to the elected state judges, and the elected state judges wouldn't have the power to rule unconstitutional under the state law what the state elected legislature did. It just doesn't seem to make any sense why the federal government should get involved in whether states can review states or not. We had the famous Marbury v. Madison, where we had judicial review. The federal court can judicially review what Congress did. Well, okay, you can have your Marbury v. Madison state by state. In states, the state courts can review and invalidate what the legislature does, and in others, they can't. What does the federal law have to do with that? That's a state issue.
It's demoralizing, frankly. Then we go back to the Supreme Court, and I wanted to ask you about Clarence Thomas, who you can't impeach him as a practical matter because there are not the votes there to do it. But you could certainly make enough noise calling for his impeachment, which I think the Democrats should do. I hate to say it, Democrats, I think any good American should do it. And I think you could call for his resignation as well, which I think any good American should support. This guy is clearly massively compromised, and the latest evidence of that is him trying to prevent the texts from being seen, those that the January 6th committee wants. I wonder if you could speak to that. These are not his wife's texts this time. He was trying to protect those before. Now these are associated with the Secretary of State.
They actually, all roads could lead to Ginny Thomas, because when they get all the communications that this chair of the Arizona Republican Party
chair,
had,
right, not the Secretary of State. Thank you. Yeah.
Some of her, she's Kelly Ward, and some of her communications, emails, so forth, may have very well been Ginny Thomas. So it's another example where Thomas wants to protect his own wife, who could be part of this investigation too. He actually got somebody. He found a fellow traveler this time, so it wasn't 8-1. Alito went with him and said, "Oh, this raises these big concerns," because they said the 7 of them, didn't vote in favor of the Arizona Republican Party. They upheld the January 6th committee subpoena. They said, yes, she has to turn over those documents so they could see who she was in communication with on January 6th. And as I say, that may be Ginny Thomas along with other people. But the 2 of them said, oh, it's so broad. It's a fishing expedition. No, it's not. These were the deniers down there. These were the people who were going to have an alternate slate. These were people who were up to illegality. And this is totally normal to subpoena. It's not her lifetime. It's right on or about January 6th, who she was in communication with. She's a fulcrum of the deniers, this conspiracy, the insurrectionists. And of course, her documents can be subpoenaed by the January 6th committee. This was a no-brainer. And yet 2 of the 9 would have quashed this subpoena. Mind-boggling.
Yeah, political hacks, and this political hackery has to be called out. And Thomas is so compromised. I mean, so obviously compromised. I mean, you can see how political compromise works with some of the other justices, how agendas can compromise, and you see it in this conservative court. But Thomas's compromise is so bald-faced. I mean, it's absolutely despicable. It's grotesque. I don't see how we can do anything but call for this man's resignation.
No, this is like the cop who sees his wife speeding and just won't issue a ticket because, wait a second, she's my wife.
Exactly.
I want to rule in her favor. I want to help her. She's my wife. I want to shield her because she's my wife. It's so utterly improper. I mean, this will go down as something that we really haven't seen before. You know, we've had bad Supreme Court justices. You know, Dred Scott comes to mind. The decisions when FDR was president, trying to knock down the New Deal. You know, we've had some real not good Supreme Court justices. But this level of this obvious conflict of interest that everybody can see, except, you know, they won't say the emperor has no clothes. I mean, this particular one, you know, Ginny Thomas, had urged these Republican lawmakers in Arizona to choose alternate slates of electors. You know, these are the people who waited around in the bathroom in buildings overnight to be there at 9 o'clock in the morning to supposedly having the swearing in of their alternate slate of electors. If you're hanging around in the bathroom overnight, you're probably violating the law. It's not that's a bad look. That's a red flag.
That's the first rule of law. If you're hanging out in the bathroom overnight, probably nothing good's happening. Hey, David, join us next week. Same time. We'll get this thing organized. I love this. If this works best, we'll just have you call in. It's really cool. David Katz, everybody. Thanks, David.